For thousands of years, there's been this totally natural biological process that has literally shaped religion, medicine, politics, and even global economies. And yet, most of us know almost nothing about its extraordinary history. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the untold history of menstruation, exploring how societies across time have understood, feared, managed, and eventually commercialized it.
Okay, here's our roadmap. We're going to cover ancient beliefs in medicine, sacred power and danger, historical menstrual management, the menstrual revolution, global access and stigma, and finally, why menstruation matters today. Let's get right into it.
Chapter 1: Ancient Beliefs and Early Medicine.
So, before modern science, how did doctors even explain periods? Well, it really depended on where you lived. In ancient Greece and Rome, they relied on humoral medicine. Basically, they thought the body was governed by 4 humors or fluids, and they believed women's bodies were inherently weaker, meaning they couldn't process all their blood. So bleeding was just a way of purging excess polluting fluids to keep everything balanced. But look over at Eastern traditions like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, and you get a completely different story. They saw the cycle not as a toxic purge, but as a direct reflection of a woman's vital energy, harmony, and overall internal health. And these ancient Eastern systems were incredibly detailed. Traditional Chinese medicine, for example, actually categorized menstrual health into specific patterns. If a woman had premenstrual tension or delayed cycles, they diagnose it as qi stagnation and focus on invigorating her energy flow. Fixed pain or heavy clots, that was blood stagnation. Heavy, bright red bleeding was categorized as heat, requiring treatments to cool the body down. They were really looking at the root emotional and physical energies, connecting things like stress straight to the physical symptoms. Chapter 2: The mystery and power of menstrual blood. Now, to give you an idea of how intense the superstition was back then, listen to this shocking quote from the Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder in 77 AD. He wrote, "Contact with it turns new wine sour. Crops touched by it become barren. Hives of bees die. Seriously, the bees die." People didn't just see this as a bodily fluid. They treated it like this potent, almost radioactive force of nature. And because of that magical thinking, you end up with this wild paradox of beliefs. In Rome, they actually thought the blood could cure illnesses like gout, but it was considered so incredibly dangerous that it required strict male supervision. Meanwhile, ancient Greek doctors like Hippocrates believed that if a young virgin didn't bleed properly, the retained blood would drive her insane with hysteria. The Maya saw it as a spiritual energy that could bewitch children but also heal wounds. And in Orthodox Christian traditions, it was seen as a fallen state, meaning women were actually barred from Holy Communion. When you look closely, these wildly contradictory beliefs all share one common thread. They were incredibly effective tools for establishing and enforcing gender-based power structures. Chapter 3: How Women Managed Periods Throughout History. Okay, let's talk logistics. You might have heard the rumor that historical women had absolutely zero protection and just sort of bled freely everywhere. But think about it for a second. A single medieval wool dress could literally take 1,000 hours to make, from shearing the sheep to sewing the seams. Does it really make any sense that women would just ruin their most valuable possessions every single month? No way. And we actually have the gritty scientific proof to back that up, thanks to the Tønsberg latrine discovery. Archaeologists digging in a 13th century latrine in Norway found deliberately folded textile strips. And when they ran tests on them, they found human blood isotopes, and even the remains of fly larvae that had fed on that blood. So, myth busted. Women have always engineered practical, real-world solutions for their bodies. And you see this incredible ingenuity all over the globe, using whatever local resources were at hand. In ancient Egypt, women softened papyrus plants to use as makeshift tampons. Ancient Romans used raw wool and linen. Indigenous Inuit cultures used rabbit fur because it's incredibly soft, warm, and absorbent. And in medieval Europe, women would combine cloth rags with sphagnum moss. Why moss? Because it is naturally super absorbent and even has antiseptic properties. It's just brilliant.
Chapter 4: The Menstrual Revolution. Everything changes in the 20th century. For most of history, women used homemade washable cloth pads. But during World War I, nurses noticed that the cellulose bandages they were using on soldiers absorbed blood way better than regular cotton. That wartime tech was quickly repurposed, and by the 1920s, we get the first commercial disposable pads. Then, in 1936, the cardboard applicator tampon hits the market, completely changing internal care. Fast forward to the 1970s, and self-adhesive pads are launching globally, making their way everywhere, even into places like socialist Yugoslavia. Now, this commercial boom wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was driven by a massive societal shift. As the 20th century progressed, women were entering the public workforce in unprecedented numbers. Take socialist Yugoslavia, for example, where the female worker was heavily celebrated as a symbol of state power. But there was a catch. To participate in this public workforce, a woman basically had to hide her biology. Her period needed to be entirely invisible. So this booming commercial hygiene industry and the push for women's workforce participation became deeply intertwined. Chapter 5: Menstruation and Global Development. So where does that leave us today? Well, the stigmas of the past are absolutely still echoing into our present. Take cultural erasure, for instance. The Dakota Nation historically held a sacred buffalo ceremony to celebrate a girl's first period and empower her, but colonizers, through residential schools, actively suppressed these indigenous practices. Then there is period poverty. Millions of people globally still do not have access to basic commercial products or clean sanitation, and that leads directly to educational barriers. Without adequate bathrooms or supplies, countless young women around the world miss days of school every single month, automatically putting them at a huge economic disadvantage. And beyond basic access, there is a major ongoing conversation right now about bodily autonomy. Check out this data from the Wolfson Institute. It shows that today, 60% of women wish they could at least sometimes postpone or control the timing of their bleeding. It really highlights how we're still figuring out how modern medicine and society can best support the actual lived realities and comfort of the female body. Chapter 6: Why Menstruation Matters to Society. When you put it all together, menstruation is so much more than just a niche medical topic or a private behind-closed-doors matter. It's a unique lens that helps historians, economists, and sociologists understand human civilization as a whole. Because when you look at who has access to products, how a culture talks about women's bodies, and whether schools and workplaces actually accommodate biological realities, you are getting a direct measure of an entire society's equality, health, and development. It is fundamentally an educational, economic, and human rights issue. And that brings us to the end of our journey. From ancient myths and sacred rituals to medieval Norwegian latrines and the modern global workforce, this one biological process has silently driven massive cultural and economic shifts. The history of menstruation really is the history of humanity itself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. As we look ahead to the future of global healthcare and equality, it really makes you wonder, what other silent biological histories are out there just waiting to be told? I'll see you next time.